Hello, Richard.
You.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been curious about the whole cultural thing with regard to the Beatles, and been interested in your comments this evening. I was 12 when the Ed Sullivan Show happened, and I've been a big fan of their music ever since. And I'm curious if you think that they were more than just manipulated, and their image as a separate thing was manipulated even further, or whether you think there was actually something deeper at work there in terms of their connection to any of this nasty cultural shift. It seems to me there good things that came out of also the exposure to meditation as an option for humanity, and I'm not sure that the mind-opening experience of the non-abuse of something like LSD or peyote isn't possibly a positive thing for some folks. But anyway, your comments about all that would be appreciated.
Yeah, okay. Well, the idea, you see, remember, too, before the Beatles came along, long before the Beatles came along, even when Aldous Huxley was writing Brave New World in the 1930s, they were talking about a future they could create if they could get the public to accept having drugs alter their minds. Not to help them in any way, shape, or form, but to control their minds. But when you're living with hallucinogenic drugs, you start to lose what they call affect. That's normal emotion. That's a side effect of it. And in fact, you can get drug-induced schizophrenia. During the phase of tripping out, you're technically schizophrenic. And this, again, was well understood. And a schizophrenic society is really easily managed because they cannot discern things properly. Things are distorted. They can't perceive clearly. Things are very distorted in their minds. So they used these techniques in ancient India on the peasants to control them for a long, long time, coupled with vegetarianism, too, and a restricted vegetarian diet at that. So food and drugs has always been used at certain times down to the histories of different countries. So it was simply being reintroduced again. Now, the Beatles didn't simply make themselves. They were made. That's how stars are made in the music industry. It's a good Hollywood myth that the movies they give you of someone with talent that just keeps pushing ahead and gets up there. That's very, very rare. Generally, stars are made. I've seen them made, in fact, in my own lifetime.
Oh, Brian.
Brian Epstein was well connected, but again, a lot of money and promotion. I don't know how much people realize was spent on promoting the Beatles before anyone had heard or even seen them. There was a tremendous build-up. Now, whenever you see a tremendous build-up about something that's going to appear and it's taken millions of dollars to do so through advertising and promotion, that's going to be a success. And it wasn't the first time it had been done. They'd done it before with Charles Darwin, when he brought his book out on evolution. They built it up in the British press and the world press for about 2 years before they released the book, and that guaranteed he'd be an instant genius in the eyes of the public. And sure enough,
Have a involvement in the Beatles, do you think?
I'm pretty sure that others, definitely others associated with the Beatles and were managing them, were associated with Tavistock, because Tavistock was heavy into music long before even rock or pop music came along. They were trying out different kinds of the effects of jazz, a certain type of jazz on the minds as far back as the 1920s. And there was a Jewish jazz writer in New York who was kidnapped by the Soviets and taken over to the Soviets because he had a technique that he was working on which could put youngsters, especially, who are more prone to it, into almost an altered state. And that eventually was coupled with a technique that was released years and years later, and they called them the beatniks, where again they introduced these guys who were kind of scruffy. They smoked weed and just played this kind of laid back kind of jazz, sometimes atonal jazz, and that took off more in Europe, but it didn't do well in Britain or the United States, and so they went back to the drawing board and gave us pop music and launched that tremendously. Again, in Britain it was only the BBC, which is owned as an arm of the British government. And the BBC really promoted and started off what we call the pop industry from the top down again. And we know that Steve Martin and others were taught heavily into these techniques of how the mind reacts and how the different brain patterns alter by using certain types of music. And they worked heavily with Gibson in the US on stereo, etc., and using sequencing, what they call sequencing within the stereo. To the average listener, you just hear certain instruments in one ear and certain instruments in the other from the other speaker, but there's actually sequences. It's almost like pulses going back and forth in certain songs, and these actually could put you in an altered state as well. Very conducive.
You're a musician as well, Alan, and I wish that you would use some of your music for the bumper stuff from time to time. And bumper music that you do use seems to indicate that you're a fan of a certain popular music and stuff. And I just wondered what your thought is about good music, bad music, that sort of thing in terms of the cultural influence.
Oh yeah, I mean, bad music's quite simple. It's not so much bad. Remember, the guys at the top don't see things as bad or good. I'll finish this after the following messages. Alan walked back, cutting through the matrix, and sure enough, this code of silence, this state of ignorance can't go on, or we're all doomed. But I know Martin in Britain had some of the best equipment that could be produced, way ahead of its time in recording studios, and he worked with I think it was even Les Paul who came up with the stereo from the US. The guy who also gave the Gibson guitar, which is really good. But they knew how it would affect the mind, and they were doing experiments even before the Beatles using electroencephalograph machines and playing types of music to youngsters especially who are more prone to altered states, you might call it, even close to a meditative state, which some music can put you into. Classical music can also do the same. And they also knew that they could bring out anger by certain types of music, and we see that going on through the jazz. Jazz was very good for creating really freaky states in the beatnik generation, and then later down through the ages we had the Sid Vicious types from Britain, punk rockers who screamed and raged, and then we went down into rap, where you wrap it up, and now they're sort of floundering at the bottom. Now they don't know what to do. They call it hip hop and so on. So we've gone all the way down from classical to pop, then rock, and a whole bunch of stuff down to rap. And that seems to be almost the end at the moment. They're using a lot of techno sounds to get us used to computerized sounds, because one day we'll hear that in our heads when we've all got brain chips. We'll hear the almost mechanical computer type operating sound going through our heads, and that'll be a new type of music to the public. But when it comes to the promotion of mind-altering drugs, that was one of the functions that Aleister Crowley was given by what became MI6, who now have admitted that he worked for them. They're very good at giving us gurus, and his job was to kick off this next part of the New Age movement. The old stuff was started by Madame Blavatsky in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and we find Crowley was sent out there to fascinate the youth, and you'll find him on the covers of a lot of albums. Even the Beatles had all their heroes on an album cover. I think it was Sgt. Pepper, and you'll see Aleister Crowley in there amongst Karl Marx and many others. And mind-altering drugs, as I say, were pushed so heavily, except that it didn't tell you the fallout from it all. And the mental hospitals, the psychiatric hospitals, got the fallout because many people didn't come back from those trips. Their minds were left elsewhere, and they ended up having a drug-induced schizophrenia. Other ones that I knew became incredibly naive. It made them more prone to suggestibility. They became hyper-suggestible, which again is a great way if you want a public that you can make believe anything. And so drugs do that. They take away your common sense.